Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're focusing our gaze on a figure whose private financial power was, well, just immense. So completely dominant, really, that he effectively ran the entire American financial system for a time.
hmm
Before the government had a formal mechanism to prevent total collapse, before the Federal Reserve even existed, there was this one man who stood in the gap. J.P. Morgan.
That's right.
So we're diving into the unparalleled authority and maybe the shadowy web known simply as the House of Morgan.
It's really essential as we start this deep dive to grasp the political and economic vacuum we're talking about here.
Right.
For a really pivotal period in U.S. history, think the Gilded Age, early progressive era, the stability, the actual safety, the ability of the nation's markets to even function, it didn't reside in Washington, D.C.
Not with the government.
No, not at all. It rested pretty much entirely with one man and his private institution. So we're going to meticulously examine the nature and, frankly, the sheer reach of this private power structure.
A structure that, as you say, often operated with more authority than elected officials.
Absolutely. It really illustrates what happens when you get this concentration of, well, unmatched financial genius and just monumental capital all in one place.
Our sources paint a fascinating picture, sometimes maybe even a frightening one, of this authority. So our mission today is to go beyond just a simple biography.
Right.
We want to unpack the specific and often kind of contradictory roles the House of Morgan played. We'll look at how they systematically underwrote and consolidated these industrial giants.
Like U.S. Steel.
Exactly. And how Morgan personally intervened to halt financial distress, the famous stories of locking bankers in rooms.
Oh, yeah, the Panic of 1907. We definitely need to get into that.
We do. And maybe most importantly, the political friction this extraordinary private power inevitably created, especially when it ran headfirst into someone like President Theodore Roosevelt.
That clash is key.
Yeah. This whole conversation really, it's fundamentally about that tension, isn't it? Between, like, necessary private genius on one hand and maybe unacceptable unelected power on the other. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with section 1. The House of Morgan's dual identity. You called it private bank and public savior. That name, House of Morgan, it evokes this sense of history, of gravitas. But what was this entity, really? Structurally and maybe psychologically for the public?
Well, the structure itself was definitely part of the mystique. When people talked about the House of Morgan, they meant the specific bank, J.P. Morgan and Company in New York, the building on Wall Street.
Okay.
But our sources make it clear that more often, the term was used in a much broader, more powerful sense. It referred to this wide, integrated, and frankly, kind of shadowy web of partnerships.
Shadowy web. Sounds intriguing.
It was. It connected affiliates across London, Philadelphia, Paris. This network, this interconnectedness, gave the bank its almost amorphous, pervasive power. It wasn't just one building.
And the clients they served, they weren't just anybody off the street, right? This wasn't a bank for the common person.
Oh, absolutely not. It was built on exclusivity, almost aristocracy. From the very beginning, the bank cultivated this aura of, well, almost impossible exclusivity.
How so?
It's described as the most Mandarin of banks. Think of that term like a high official, rarefied air, unquestioned authority.
Mandarin, right.
They catered almost exclusively to the financial aristocracy of the age. The families whose wealth basically defined American industry back then.
So we're talking the real titans, the names everyone knows.
Exactly. The established wealth like the Astors, the Guggenheims, the DuPonts, the Vanderbilts, they were the clientele. And this exclusivity, it was a deliberate strategy. It wasn't accidental.
A strategy?
Yeah. They actively shunned dealings with what people at the time called lesser mortals. And that shunning, that deliberate barrier, that's precisely what fueled public suspicion.
Oh, okay. Because it looked like a private club.
Exactly. It cemented this perception that Morgan's Bank was a private club run for and by the super elite, and that their only concern was maintaining that elite ecosystem.
And yet, it was that very position right at the top of American finance combined with the lack of a proper federal authority that kind of forced the House of Morgan into roles no private bank should logically ever hold.
That's the paradox.
They essentially became this private institution acting as a public savior.
They really occupied this unique space. The early House of Morgan operated as this strange hybrid, a cross between a traditional private investment bank and, well, an actual central bank.
Hybrid, okay.
And look, this wasn't a role they necessarily sought out of pure altruism. It was often one they were kind of compelled to take because The system kept
The
failing.
whole financial system.
Yeah, and when the system failed, guess who suffered catastrophic losses first? Their exclusive clients. And of course, their own massive investments.
Self-preservation then, at least partly.
Partly, yes, but it forced them into these public-facing roles.
So in the absence of the Fed, what were these unique sort of national responsibilities they ended up taking on? It wasn't just managing bonds, clearly. It sounds like literally saving the country at times.
It was far beyond typical banking. The historical record shows their unique responsibilities included, well, routinely intervening to stop financial panics.
Stopping panics.
They were, de facto, the lender of last resort. There wasn't anyone else. They stepped in to save the U.S. gold standard multiple times, actually, which showed financial muscle the government itself seemed to lack.
Wow. Multiple times.
Yep. They also rescued New York City from insolvency 3 separate times.
3 times. Sicily itself.
3 separate times. And on top of these huge systemic bailouts, they often arbitrated major financial disputes between competing tycoons.
Why them?
Well, who else had the authority? The reputation? Who else could tell these incredibly powerful rivals how to settle a, billion-dollar fight? Only Morgan had that kind of clout.
Saving the U.S. gold standard. That just sounds like a monumental task for a private bank. How did that specific intervention really show Morgan's power?
The most famous instance, probably, was the crisis of 1895. The U.S. gold reserves were dangerously low, like almost gone. It threatened to devalue the currency, collapse international confidence. Panic was setting in.
And the government?
The government was trying desperately to sell bonds to get gold, but the market just didn't trust them enough. Morgan saw the catastrophe coming, but he also saw, well, a solution. One that conveniently aligned his self-interest with national necessity.
Conveniently right. And what was that solution?
Morgan put together a syndicate of bankers, basically a private consortium, and he negotiated directly with President Grover Cleveland.
With the president himself.
Directly, to purchase a massive block of government bonds for gold. But here's the crucial part. They didn't just buy the gold, they used their international connections to import it from Europe and guarantee they would defend the gold standard from falling further.
So they basically took over the Treasury's job.
In effect, yes. He outsourced the function of the Treasury Department to his private firm. It injected enough confidence and enough actual gold to stop the disaster. He saved the national currency. But he made a hefty profit on the deal too, of course.
Which brings us right back to that core paradox, doesn't it? This blend of what looks like public service, saving the gold standard, saving New York City with, cold, hard profit.
Is the tension right at the center of the House of Morgan story. Look, the bank's concerns often had to transcend just pure profit because systemic collapse is the ultimate enemy of profit, right?
True. Can't make money if the whole system burns down.
Exactly. So engaging in what looked like good works was often the only way to safeguard their own financial ecosystem. Our sources are really sharp on this, noting the bank had a peculiar knack for making good works pay.
A peculiar knack for making good works pay. I like that.
The interventions brought stability, which, benefited the whole nation, but they also cemented Morgan's unparalleled reputation and ensured that when the government did need rescuing, really, there was only one door to knock on.
And that reputation, that power, it was tested to its absolute limit during the Panic of 1907. If we want one single moment that defines Morgan as the private central banker, that has to be it.
Oh, without a doubt. The Panic of 1907 was this cascading financial crisis. It started, interestingly, with a failed attempt to corner the stock of the United Copper Company, a gamble that went bad.
And that triggered everything.
When that conspiracy collapsed, trust just evaporated instantly. Runs began on these things called trust companies. They were sort of like banks, but weren't part of the established clearinghouse network, so they were more vulnerable.
Okay.
The whole system started freezing up, banks failing one after another. And the government, under TR at the time, was basically powerless to stop the contagion. The Treasury could move money around, but it couldn't create confidence. That was the problem.
So everyone turns to the only person with enough capital, and maybe more importantly, enough personal gravity, enough authority to stop the panic.
Precisely. They turned to Morgan. He was 70 years old at the time, actually in the middle of an Episcopal Church convention when he was summoned back to Wall Street.
70 years old.
And he immediately took command. Just his personal appearance was apparently enough to calm some fears initially.
Right.
But the real work, the legendary stuff, happened in his imposing private library on 36th Street.
Okay, let's picture that scene. Because this is the stuff of financial legend, isn't it?
It really is. Over several nights, Morgan often pictured sitting by a massive fireplace smoking his cigars. He basically locked the nation's top financial leaders in his library.
Lock them in! Seriously.
That's the story that comes down. He gathered the heads of the major banks, the trust companies, the big corporations. They weren't there to chat or discuss options. They were there to be commanded.
Command.
Yeah, the sources describe him sitting there, essentially dictating the terms of America's financial survival.
Oh.
He reportedly would not let them leave until they agreed sometimes, apparently, under serious duress, to pool their resources and put up the money needed to prop up the failing institutions.
That is just an unbelievable display of leverage. A single private citizen holding the keys, forcing the most powerful men in finance to obey him.
It was an absolute raw demonstration of concentrated, unelected power. At one critical point, Morgan was essentially holding a gun to the heads of the trust company presidents. He demanded they commit $25 million by a certain hour,
Or else.
or else the whole system collapses. When they hesitated, he famously had the door locked or relocked and told them something like, "There must be $25 million here right now or the country will go into receivership. I will not let you leave until you sign."
Wow, the sheer force of will.
And the knowledge concentration, too. He knew exactly which institutions were basically sound, which needed saving, how much money was needed, and he used his personal reputation, his personal guarantee, to make the deal stick. Nobody else could have done that.
So the system was literally based on his personal guarantee.
In that moment, yes. The interventions that followed, saving the Knickerbocker Trust, preventing the stock market from collapsing entirely, shoring up New York City, which couldn't even meet his payroll, they were all orchestrated by Morgan acting as the ultimate authority.
And this moment, more than any other, it really highlighted the massive danger, didn't it? Placing national stability in the hands of one guy.
Absolutely. It was heroic in a way, certainly necessary at the time, but it was an intervention that just screamed out for a formal public replacement. It couldn't go on like that.
And that immense private power, that ability to intervene, it was built on a foundation of controlling the industrial economy itself, right? Which takes us to our next section.
Oh.
Okay, moving into section 2. The source of Morgan's immense power wasn't just his bank. It was his direct financial control over the core industrial infrastructure of America. The House Morgan didn't just lend money. They kind of chose which giants would dominate the 20th century.
Absolutely. They were really the engine room of that Gilded Age industrial consolidation.
Yeah.
The goal wasn't just profit through interest payments. It was profit through consolidation and control.
Consolidation and control.
Yeah, eliminating messy competition, maximizing efficiency, often under their direct supervision. The source material gives us a pretty clear roster of the companies the House of Morgan financed. And it's a list that basically reads like the index of American economic dominance back then.
Let's run through that list just to illustrate the reach. We're talking U.S. Steel,
The biggest of them all initially.
General Electric,
Yep.
General Motors, DuPont, American Telephone and Telegraph, AT&T.
I mean, just think about those names. Steel, electricity, cars, chemicals, communications. It's staggering.
So how did Morgan approach consolidating these industries? Let's take U.S. Steel as the prime example. That was huge.
U.S. Steel is really the defining case study of the Morganization model, as it was sometimes called. Before 1901, the steel industry was, well, chaotic, fragmented, lots of competing firms. Andrew Carnegie's operation was massive, the biggest player. But Morgan believed true stability and maximum profit required monopoly or something close to it.
So he went after Carnegie.
He approached Carnegie with a simple, massive idea: buy him out, consolidate the whole industry under one roof.
And Carnegie, famously, he supposedly named this astronomical price, thinking Morgan would balk, right?
That's the anecdote, yeah. It really captures the scale and maybe the arrogance of the era. Carnegie supposedly scribbled a figure $480 million on a scrap of paper. Just an unbelievable sum at the time.
$480 million in 1901 dollars.
And Morgan, legend has it, barely glanced at it and just said, "I accept this price." He bought Carnegie out. Then he fused Carnegie's assets with several other major steel operations he controlled or influenced. And voila, the U.S. Steel Corporation.
The world's first billion-dollar corporation. What kind of power does that give the financier, the guy who puts the whole thing together?
Immense power. Because the sheer act of creation meant that Morgan partners or their affiliates immediately entered into their councils, as the source puts it.
Entered their councils, meaning?
Meaning they got seats on the board of directors.
Yeah.
This wasn't passive lending where you just sit back and collect interest. No. This meant Morgan's people were sitting on the boards, influencing strategy, production levels, setting prices, overseeing the management of what was now essentially the nation's entire steel output.
So the financial structure itself guaranteed ongoing control.
Exactly. It was designed to ensure the House of Morgan remained deeply entangled in the operations of these colossal firms they created.
And this wasn't just limited to basic, heavy industry like steel. This model, it extended into the new technologies that would really define modern life.
Absolutely. Look at General Electric. Morgan was instrumental in financing Thomas Edison's early electric light company. And then later, he orchestrated the merger that actually created GE. The House of Morgan provided the financial muscle, yes, but also the organizational blueprint.
Taking these innovative, maybe fragmented technologies.
Right, and turning them into standardized national utilities or corporations, same pattern.
Or AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph. It became the single entity controlling the nation's communication infrastructure for decades. The pattern seems clear. Wherever there was a chance to consolidate, rationalize, establish a dominant market force, Morgan was the orchestrator.
He was. And this deep entanglement, this reaching into steel, electricity, automobiles with GM, communications with AT&T, it naturally aroused widespread fear of undue banker power among the public, among politicians. It wasn't just about the wealth Morgan controlled. It was about the control over commerce itself. If one banking house controlled the steel, the electricity, the cars, the phones, what part of the American economy wasn't somehow touched or influenced by the House of Morgan?
That interconnectedness, this seemingly invisible web stretching across everything, that's exactly what fed the mythology of the conspiracy theories around the bank, wasn't it?
Oh, it absolutely fueled 1,000 conspiracy theories, as one source puts it. The structure was inherently opaque, not transparent.
Right.
When the public saw Morgan partners holding board seats across dozens of major companies, sometimes even supposed competitors, they naturally assumed there was this sinister, unified hand pulling all the strings, controlling the economic destiny of the country behind the scenes.
And this kept generations of muckrakers, investigative journalists busy trying to expose the full extent of Morgan's influence.
For decades, the House of Morgan became the ultimate symbol of the financial oligarchy. Incredibly powerful, incredibly wealthy, and seemingly, fundamentally, unaccountable to the public.
And that influence wasn't just domestic, was it? Even later generations of the Morgan firm carried this kind of symbolic financial weight onto the global stage, almost acting like an extension of American state power.
That's where the private authority became truly international, yeah. Look at the actions of Jack Morgan, J.P. Morgan Jr., his son, in the years after World War I. Even after Pierpont Morgan's death, the name itself carried immense weight.
So what did Jack Morgan do?
Well, in 1922, the U.S. government itself, the Secretary of State, Commerce Secretary Herbert Hoover, they asked Jack to participate in this Global Bankers Committee in Paris.
Okay, what was this committee about?
It was considering a massive international loan to Germany. This was about stabilizing the continent after the devastation of the war, trying to get Germany back on its feet economically to prevent future problems.
And why was Morgan, a private banker, so essential to what sounds like a major diplomatic effort?
Because the House of Morgan, even then, was seen as the preeminent symbol of America's newfound economic strength, its global solvency. Even though Jack Morgan himself was apparently quite anti-German after the war and initially opposed any trade,
He still went.
he accepted the invitation because, basically, he was needed. His presence was treated by the international press as a major diplomatic event, not just some financial meeting. The New York Herald reported that his attendance was attracting more attention than any American official since President Woodrow Wilson showed up for the Versailles Peace Conference.
That comparison is just staggering. A private banker having more diplomatic gravity than any government official except the president.
It really demonstrates how the global community understood things. Jack Morgan represented the tremendous American power that may be used for the rehabilitation of Europe. In the eyes of the world, American power was Morgan's financial capacity.
That's the ultimate example, maybe, of private power superseding public authority.
Yeah.
A family firm setting terms for reconstructing a continent.
It really is. And it's precisely this massive, consolidated private power, both domestic and international, that set the stage for that inevitable moment of confrontation. The clash with the public authority of the federal government, specifically in the form of Theodore Roosevelt.
Okay, Section 3. Friction with public authority. This clash between J.P. Morgan and President Theodore Roosevelt, it's one of the great narrative turning points in American history, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
It was this clash between two massive egos, both products of the same, New York aristocratic world, but representing fundamentally opposed visions for the American economy.
That's a great way to put it. And Roosevelt, as the sources point out, he was a showman, a master manipulator of public opinion.
Right.
He knew he needed a big, visible target to symbolize his war against unchecked industrial and financial power, the trusts, as they were called. And honestly, there was no greater symbol of concentrated, unelected power than J.T. Morgan himself.
So Roosevelt used him symbolically.
He endlessly manipulated the Morgan symbolism, as one source says, to rally public support for his trust-busting agenda. He needed a villain, and Morgan fit the bill perfectly in the public eye.
The political opportunity, the trigger moment for TR, came in 1901 with that financial skirmish known as the Northern Pacific Corner. We should probably clarify what that was and why it genuinely appalled the public.
Yeah, definitely. The Northern Pacific Corner wasn't just some inside baseball business deal. It was basically financial warfare that almost crashed the entire stock market.
Financial warfare.
Pretty much. The battle was between two colossal railroad interests. On one side, you had Morgan and his key ally, James J. Hill, who controlled the Northern Pacific Railway.
Yeah.
On the other side was E.H. Harriman, who represented Rockefeller interests. Harriman launched this audacious hostile takeover attempt, trying to secretly buy up enough Northern Pacific stock to seize control.
So Harriman tried to buy control, forcing Morgan and Hill to fight back.
Correct. They had to buy shares aggressively just to defend their own company. This frantic buying by both sides pushed the price of Northern Pacific shares and other critical railway stocks got caught in the crossfire to just impossible heights.
And what happened to regular investors?
Many investors who had bet against the stock, who had shorted it, were wiped out, instantly bankrupted. The market, in May 1901, saw these sudden, violent swings caused entirely by the unchecked maneuvering of these two financial giants fighting over a railroad.
So the public saw this.
The public looked on and realized, wait a minute, our entire financial stability could be destroyed overnight just because two really rich guys are having a brawl.
It was terrifying. A demonstration of raw, consolidated power, creating massive systemic risk for everyone else.
Roosevelt must have seen the political gold in that fallout. He had to show the government could actually do something about this kind of recklessness.
Precisely. The goal was to prove the White House wasn't just going to stand by, that it had teeth. So Roosevelt targeted the corporate entity that emerged from that struggle.
The Northern Securities Company. This was the massive holding company that Morgan and Hill formed after the battle to finalize their control over the Northern Pacific and other railroads, precisely to prevent future takeover attempts like Harriman's.
So they created an even bigger entity to stop the fighting.
Exactly. And TR saw the political wisdom, the perfect opportunity to file an antitrust suit against this brand new corporate behemoth, to break it up.
And the way the announcement was handled, that was pure TR political theater, wasn't it?
Oh, classic PR strategy.
Okay.
His Attorney General, Philander C. Knox, announced the antitrust suit after the stock market closed on Tuesday, February 19, 1902.
Why after the close?
The timing was critical. It prevented immediate market panic the next morning, but it ensured the news would dominate the headlines and hit the national consciousness with full force overnight. It was effectively a declaration of war against Morgan's creation.
How did Morgan react? I mean, this is the guy who was used to rescuing the government, not being attacked by it.
It genuinely caught Morgan by surprise at a dinner. That says a lot. Morgan lived in a world where the government sought his advice, his help. They didn't challenge his deals in public court without, at least a warning phone call.
Right.
The suit signaled very clearly that the White House wouldn't automatically succumb to Morgan pressure. This was a completely new game.
And our sources suggest that his subsequent confrontation with the administration really showed Morgan in all his sublime arrogance.
Yeah.
Tell us about that meeting.
Morgan was furious.
Ah.
He immediately traveled down to Washington, D.C. and went straight to the Attorney General's office to Knox.
To apologize, negotiate.
Neither. He was there to fix the problem, as if it were just some clerical error, some misunderstanding that he could smooth over. He famously asked Knox, "Is there anything you can tell me what to do to put this thing right?"
He treated the entire antitrust suit like a minor dispute that just needed his personal intervention to clean up. Amazing.
Exactly. He saw the president's actions as, needlessly disruptive to business stability, which, in Morgan's worldview, was the highest good. Morgan reportedly told Knox, "If we have done anything wrong, send your man to see my man and they can fix it up."
Send your man to see my man. That line just perfectly encapsulates his belief system, doesn't it?
Hmm.
That the government was just this regulatory annoyance that his powerful organization could easily manage and fix up through quiet, private channels.
He was the ultimate display of expecting to operate above the law, beyond public accountability. You can imagine Morgan's astonishment when Knox flatly refused. Knox simply said something like, "That can't be done. We don't want to fix it up, we want to stop it."
Go.
Roosevelt had made his point loud and clear. The financial elite could no longer expect automatic deference. They would be subject to the law like everyone else.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, that despite these profound policy disagreements, Roosevelt wanting to break up trusts, Morgan wanting to consolidate them for stability and efficiency, they actually came from similar backgrounds.
Yeah, the sources suggest this shared background, this New York aristocratic milieu, might have given their feud a special rancor.
Special rancor.
They both belonged to the same social stratum. They were both founders of institutions like the American Museum of Natural History. They moved in the same circles. So this wasn't just a political fight between strangers. It was almost like a schism within the elite. It became personal.
Like a family fight, almost.
Maybe. When political clashes happen between rivals who know each other that well, understand each other's worlds intimately, the wounded pride, the sense of betrayal, it often intensifies the conflict way beyond just ideological disagreement.
So, stepping back, what's the core meaning of this whole standoff? You have Morgan, who had the proven practical power to literally save the U.S. financial system, as he would do just 5 years later in 1907, yet here he is, checked by the political will of the president.
This moment is just a profound inflection point in American governance. It really confirms that fundamental tension between private financial dominance and public governance. Despite Morgan's demonstrated ability to save the economy, something TR himself would later have to rely on in the 1907 panic, the political system was asserting itself,
Saying enough is enough.
saying that unchecked corporate giants could not just consolidate power indefinitely without any public oversight. This really underscores that fear we talked about, the undue banker power. The public, represented by TR, was demanding accountability.
So the ultimate takeaway here is that Morgan's power, however necessary it might have seemed at times, had just become too immense, too concentrated to continue unchecked in a democracy. It was the beginning of the end for that era where one man could single-handedly run the nation's finances.
It really was a necessary end. The successful prosecution of the Northern Securities case, the Supreme Court eventually upheld the government's position. It validated the government's ability to police corporate behavior, at least in theory.
And then the panic of 1907 sealed the deal.
Even more decisively. The spectacle of Morgan personally having to lock bankers in his library during the 1907 panic provided the final political catalyst. It was proof positive right there for everyone to see that the entire U.S. financial system was relying on the temporary mercy and capacity of a single aging private citizen.
A situation that just couldn't last.
It was deemed unacceptable. And that led directly to things like the Pujo Committee investigations into the money trust, and ultimately to the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, finally creating a public central bank.
So Morgan was both the savior in the moment and the final necessary trigger for fundamental systemic change. What a story. As we wrap up this deep dive, the story of J.P. Morgan is really one of immense concentrated power, but power that was arguably born out of historical necessity. He ran the U.S. financial system effectively as a private enterprise. He acted as the ultimate lender of last resort, a position he occupied largely because there was no strong, formal public mechanism capable of handling those kinds of systemic crises back then.
That absence of a formal structure is absolutely the essential context for understanding the Gilded Age and Morgan's role. The House of Morgan became the ultimate symbol of concentrated unelected power.
For good and ill.
Exactly. Their ability to stop panics, to finance the biggest corporations, even bail out the government itself, it was unparalleled. Yet that very ability bred intense public suspicion, political fear. The paradox is stark. His capacity for stabilization was often necessary, but his method, essentially dictatorial control by a private individual, was fundamentally incompatible with democratic accountability in the long run.
Morgan really demonstrated that the concentration of capital led both to that undue banker power people feared and to undeniably necessary interventions, like stopping the 1907 panic or stabilizing the currency earlier. He was kind of the necessary bridge to the modern financial age we live in now.
And that transition, that bridge, is what makes the Morgan story still so relevant today, I think. We constantly see this struggle, this tension between the need for financial stability and the demands for democratic accountability.
Still wrestling with it.
We are. His life, his firm, they serve as this perfect, maybe extreme example of how financial genius and immense private capital can solve problems that government bureaucracy sometimes can't, but often at the cost of concentrating immense control in the hands of a very few unelected people.
Which leads us to a really critical question for you, the listener, to maybe carry forward from this deep dive. JP Morgan proved that centralized financial power, even when it was private, was often essential to stop total collapse. The Federal Reserve System later institutionalized that centralized power, but under public control.
Right.
So the question is, to what extent is centralized financial power, whether it's private like Morgan's or public like the Federal Reserve, a necessary evil for stability? And where should society draw the line between acknowledging that necessary financial genius or that necessary capacity and maintaining genuine democratic governance and accountability?
It's a debate that certainly didn't end with Morgan's death in 1913 or the creation of the Fed. It continues today, doesn't it? You see it reflected in ongoing concerns over banks being too big to fail, the vast influence of the financial sector, the power of accumulated capital to reshape not just industry, but maybe even governance itself.
Yeah.
The Morgan era just shows us, in really stark terms, the extreme historical consequences when that crucial power structure is allowed to remain entirely private, entirely unchecked.
A fascinating and cautionary tale. A huge thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this exploration of J.P. Morgan, the man who bailed out America, has given you a fresh and detailed perspective on that complex, often tense relationship between wealth, power, and governance in American history.
Thanks for diving in.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.